And again, hello and welcome. I'm Elisa Salonis-Centric, the Senior Communications and Outreach Manager at the California Water Data Consortium. Thank you all for joining our 2026 Town Hall on maximizing Proposition 4 with water data and information systems. While we wait for folks to log on and get settled, I'm going to go over some quick housekeeping and the agenda. So yes, this meeting is being recorded and will be sent out via email on our website and on our YouTube channel. So you'll get those in your inbox in the next couple of weeks. We do have several audience polls throughout the presentation portion of the event to help us kind of understand where you all are in the context of Prop 4 and what questions you might have. We'll be using Mentimeter, so please keep your phones handy or a browser window open nearby. Questions are welcome throughout the event. Please add them to the chat box in Zoom. My colleague Avery will be collecting those for our Q&A section later on. And then please complete the survey at the end of the event or when you close your window, your Zoom window. This helps us plan for future events and meetings. As you can see, we have a very full agenda in store, so I'm going to do my best to keep us on track and on time. Before I hand it over to our board president, Meredith Lee, to welcome everybody, I'm going to start us off with a quick poll to give us a sense of who's in the room today. Again, my colleague will drop the URL into the chat for the poll. That's there. And feel free to take a picture with your phone for the QR code and please answer the questions. Awesome. You'll be able to see that kind of update in real time. I'll give us about 60 seconds, now maybe about 40 seconds to answer this question. Awesome. Majority support organizations right now, followed by potential grantees. Still figuring out how this applies to our work. Other. Awesome. Okay, I'll move us along. Thank you all for answering that. So to start us off, I'd like to hand things off to Meredith Lee, our co-chair, or sorry, Meredith Lee, our chair of the California Water Data Consortium Board, to set the stage for why this work matters. The floor is yours, Meredith.
Thank you so much, Elisa. Can you hear me okay? Great. Welcome, everyone. It has been so energizing to see the interest and the steady progress around Prop 4. You'll hear throughout the discussions today how we are collectively at an inflection point. Technology, data science, this thing called AI, which you might have seen in the headlines, and so many new capabilities are reshaping water management across the state and beyond. The outcomes and value created for all Californians are not predetermined, though. And I know many people in the audience have decades and decades of experience that is so critical to the successes to date. And folks are also rolling up their sleeves to contribute more. So I just wanted to lift that up and say thank you, truly. Our summer roundtable, which I know many of the folks here today were part of, convened 100 or more leaders asking, how do we ensure that Prop 4's $3.8 billion delivers real outcomes? And we heard loud and clear that the answer includes treating data infrastructure as critical infrastructure, not as an afterthought. The past decade we've seen has shown what intentional investment can look like, whether we're thinking about Sigma, satellite technology, LiDAR, groundwater accounting. There are so many examples that you'll hear brought up throughout this town hall. Critically, we now have resources through Prop 4 and a roadmap through the report and additional resources. And it's time to really gather all of our collective strengths to intentionally implement and create the types of outcomes that we all want to see. Many of the panelists that are featured today are doing this work, and it's a learning process, learning how to incorporate technology thoughtfully, to collaborate across our silos, and ultimately to serve our communities. So thank you for being here. I'd like to turn the mic over to the wonderful Eddie Ocampo, who leads community sustainability work at Self-Help Enterprises and understands firsthand what regional resilience requires. Eddie, our wonderful steering committee co-chair.
Thank you, Meredith, and you're much too kind. Good morning, everybody. It's really great to be here today, even if it is on Zoom. I want to start off by sharing that I come from this work in a really personal way. I'll just take a minute to share a little bit about my story. I grew up in Wasco here in the San Joaquin Valley in an immigrant farm worker community. My parents worked in the fields, and growing up, access to water wasn't a policy conversation or a planning document. It was part of everyday life. You knew when something wasn't working, and you knew when the water didn't taste well, and you definitely knew that if something broke, wasn't necessarily a backup plan to waiting to just be available. Uh, so a lot of that mattered in our house, and that kind of stuff sticks with you. And I know it stuck with me, and I know it sticks. It's familiar with a lot of folks who grew up here in the valley, places like Fairmead, Planada, Delano, McFarland, Shafter, all across our valley. Today, like many of you, I wear a lot of different hats. One of them is as where I serve as the co-chair of the steering committee for the California Water Data Consortium. And in my day job, I work for Self-Help Enterprises, where for the last 60 years, we partner with rural and working class communities to build affordable housing, expand access to clean drinking water, and evolve long-term sustainability here in the valley. For a long time, up until recently, my work meant driving to small towns and communities and sitting at kitchen tables, sharing coffee, and mostly listening to residents, listening to water system operators, listening to local leaders, and we're struggling, to address a lot of these challenges that we're all facing. And when you spend a lot of time out here in the valley and in these rural parts of California, you learn a few things, and they become pretty clear. You learn that you can't talk about housing, affordable housing, without talking about water. You can't talk about uh, community health without talking about groundwater, and you can't talk about climate resilience without talking about who has access to data and tools, who doesn't have access to data and tools. The communities that we work with are dealing with overdrafted basins, aging infrastructure, extreme heat, flooding, and increasing regulatory pressure. And a lot of this is technical. But honestly, the hardest part of what we do isn't the engineering. It's not the technical part. It's the building trust. Trust is what lets people sit down and say, we might not agree, but at least we're agreeing that we're starting out with the same facts, with the same data. And that's why data infrastructure matters to people like me, to the communities that we serve here in the valley and throughout California. For our communities, data isn't about being fancy or cutting edge. It's about being understandable. It's about being shared, and it's about being fair. Good data gives us a common language and helps us, communities, agencies, and funders say, okay, we're looking at the same reality. We're looking at the same movie. We're looking at the same options. And when this doesn't happen, people talk past each other. Smaller communities get passed over. They get overlooked. Decisions get made without local context, and trust is lost. And it's really hard to get trust back. That's why this last summer's roundtable mattered. It asked some really hard questions we've all been wrestling with in one way or the other. How do we build regional resilience if we don't have the same equitable access to data? If some communities are struggling to get, the data tools that they need, while others may have some of these data tools more readily available. Out of these conversations, we came up with 5 pillars, which Tara is going to be talking more in a bit, which are, and these conversations were really, really important, but if I really had to sum it up, I'd sum it down to one key takeaway, and it comes to the qualifier, and it's that collaboration multiplies impact, but only if people trust the data. Only if people trust the data. So you can't just ask communities to make hard decisions about groundwater, land use, or climate adaptation if they don't see themselves in the data. The data has to be relevant. That's why Proposition 4 is such a real opportunity, not just to fund projects, but to invest in shared systems that connect regions, build transparency, and give under-resourced communities a real seat at the table. And what I said here in the Valley, data infrastructure is equity infrastructure. It's access infrastructure, and it gives me hope. Just like the panel that's about to talk shortly in a little bit, also gives me hope. These folks are doing work right now with imperfect data, limited funding, and very real community needs. This isn't theoretical, it's applied. You want long-term, if we really want long-term resilience here in the Valley and beyond, we have to build it together. And that starts with trust. And it starts with a clear understanding of the data that is beneath the decisions that we're being asked to make. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to talk, and back to you, Alicia.
Thank you, Eddie. Those were some extremely impactful words, and I know I wrote down a few. So I'm actually now going to hand it over to Tara to briefly walk us through some of the report's key findings. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Elisa, and thank you, Meredith and Eddie. It's such a great tee up to the conversation we're hoping to have here today. And thank you, all of you, for being here. For those of you who have not yet read the report, it's Strengthening California's Climate Bond Outcomes with Water Data Infrastructure. And I'm going to just provide a brief overview or summary here, but I would really strongly encourage you to read it if you haven't had a chance to yet. We provide a lot of additional details that I won't get into here, as well as a lot of great examples of projects that are going on throughout the state that benefit from improved data. And before I get started, I just want to also acknowledge the many individuals who helped us co-author the report and reviewed it for us. They're listed here. Many of you are on the Zoom call today, and just a huge thank you to all of you. Your contributions, suggestions, and revisions really substantially improved the report, and we're just really appreciative of the time and the work that you put in. And so the report really builds on discussion from this roundtable event that we've talked about, where we had leaders with water, policy, research, philanthropy, expertise. We brought them together to really explore how modernizing California's water data and information systems, including the governance structure supporting them, can drive smarter investments, climate adaptation strategies, and water resilience and long-term sustainability. And one of the key takeaways, as we've heard already from that meeting, is just how critical data is to the functioning of California's water systems. And the data really, as a result, needs to be viewed as critical infrastructure. Just like the physical water infrastructure, dams, levees, treatment plants, and the like, we all rely on for water planning and operations. We need data and digital systems to support their operation, to identify potential maintenance issues, and ensure that these systems can continue to support resilient water and changing climates. And while we often fund the physical infrastructure, the value of these systems really isn't fully realized without the funding and support of digital systems to support their long-term operation. So Prop 4 Climate Bond includes this $3.8 billion for water resilience. Unfortunately, data infrastructure was barely mentioned as part of that bill. And so part of the goal of the roundtable event and the report is to really develop recommendations to better embed data into the Prop 4 granting programs and funding opportunities beyond those. And so really fortunate to be at a point right now where many of the granting programs are just getting underway, and we really have an opportunity to shape them And so we're going to be asking you all some questions about that as we move through the program today. And so when we, what do we mean, just quickly to ground this conversation, what do we mean when we say data systems? Well, as we discuss in the report, when we say data infrastructure or data systems, we're not just talking about the technology, we're talking about sort of the full data ecosystem. Yes, you need sensors, platforms, and all of the technology, related technology, but you also really need people to manage those systems who understand what the data means, can maintain those systems, and can really translate it and make it accessible to communities and decision makers. You also need governance structures with shared agreements about who can access data, how it's used, and how data standards and protocols can support interoperability across data systems and programs. And finally, you need all of those components to work together. So collaborative processes and structures are just really critical to the long-term success and functioning of these systems. And so with that, we're gonna just do a couple of quick Mentimeter polls. I'm gonna hand it over to Elisa, who's gonna help with that. But our first question is pretty simple. The question we wanna hear feedback on is, are there components of data collection, management, or interpretation that are impacting your ability to use data for decision-making? And it's just a sort of simple yes, no question for now. And then we're gonna ask a question where we can dig into some of those details in a second. So we're going to give you a couple more seconds. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll give you about 20 seconds.
Great. Seeing a lot of yeses so far. And yeah, really just encourage you to think sort of expansively about this question. Are you facing data challenges that impact your ability to really achieve the outcomes that you want in your community, your region?
Wonderful. So I'm going to move it on to the next question.
Okay. And so our next question, as I mentioned, is really building on that question. And it isn't only for those who answered yes to the first question, because we're really thinking about this in a more forward-looking way. But building on your experience, what are some of the larger barriers that would hinder your implementation of a more regionally coordinated, data-driven water future? And so when you think about that, and we're asking across 7 different categories, but please choose all that apply. Oh, pretty even distribution so far. That's kind of interesting. Oh, we're seeing an uptick in regionally coordinated data standards and protocols. Interesting. Oh, it's staying pretty even. Challenges across them all. Elisa, how should we do another 20 seconds?
Yeah, 20 seconds, I think.
Thank you all. This is really helpful.
Yeah, I was just going to hop on and say how much we appreciate the engagement with the polling. It's really great to see. So thank you all for being a part of it.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. And it's clear that a lot of you are grappling with a lot of a variety of challenges across water management, water data management. And so I'm going to walk through briefly just some of our recommendations from the report that were really addressed or designed to address some of these challenges and build from the conversations that we had at this roundtable event, where we really asked this question of what would it take to integrate data into Prop 4 granting programs in a meaningful way. And we realized that there are a lot of constraints often with bond funding. And so we asked this question with the idea that what we learned here would help both integrate data into Prop 4 granting programs, but also extend to other state granting programs or other funding programs for water resilience and climate adaptation more broadly. And so we're going to focus on 4 recommendations from that discussion. And just to be clear about the framing for these recommendations, they were not developed to add burden or to serve sort of unfunded work for all of you. They were really developed with a view to opportunities. If we can integrate data and the funding, as Eddie sort of alluded to, the funding, the technical assistance, the guidance and resources into granting programs, and we really open up this world of possibility to re-engineer decision-making using better data and information. So in our panel discussion, you're going to hear from state and local agencies and organizations that support them on some of the ways that they've integrated data into their regional planning processes and projects. And I hope that hearing some of those examples will sort of get your creative juices flowing, and really thinking about the ways that improving data accessibility, interoperability, and sharing would change water resilience in your region. So we really view this as an opportunity as these Prop 4 granting programs are being stood up. So to the extent that we can really generate energy and momentum around some of these convening processes to support data planning, data management plans, regional hubs, and the like, that we can shape how these granting programs evolve. And each of these recommendations sort of address different pieces of the puzzle. So some can happen immediately, those sort of on the left, and then as we work through the slides, toward the right, we sort of have longer implementation timeline. So I'm going to delve into those in just a little bit more detail. So our first recommendation is to make data more usable and purposeful through the development of regional data management plans. And this recommendation really focuses on convening local entities to jointly develop priorities, to consider the data needed to meet those needs or priorities, and then to develop a plan that ensures that data and information are being collected, managed, and shared to meet those priorities. And a good example of this is with Kauai Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program, where grantees partnered with UC Merced and support organizations to develop a spatial tool that integrates data on agricultural viability, groundwater recharge, habitat, public health, and a variety of other information all into one sort of integrated platform. And because that data was planned for and integrated sort of intentionally, stakeholders could then use that information to evaluate trade-offs and ask questions like, what approach serves multiple goals that we've aligned on? And again, this program has been successful because of that front-end planning and the work to prioritize the information needed to guide those outcomes and decisions, and because there were resources devoted to bringing people together, scaling technical expertise, and really building networks for shared learning. Our second recommendation, while related to the first, encourages and supports the development of regional data coordination and stewardship hubs that are aligned with state data collection and reporting processes. And right now, often monitoring happens for a specific purpose by a single agency or entity. So one agency may collect groundwater data in one way, the next uses a different method. Critical data gaps go unaddressed because there hasn't been sort of this holistic assessment of regional needs. And not only is this inefficient, it ultimately undermines trust in the data as well as the institutions collecting it. And so when we coordinate data across regions, there's more consistency in data sets, data collection and management practices, which then enables better integration, synthesis, more trust. It also reduces costs and avoids duplication of efforts. And so a good example there is the Russian River Regional Monitoring Program, where in 2019, counties, municipalities, tribes, NGOs, and other partners came together to create a coordinated monitoring program for the watershed, where each of those entities, instead of having each of those entities run their own programs, they aligned on goals and data needs. And the result of that work has been higher quality data, lower costs, and stronger relationships across those regions. Our third recommendation is to ensure that water and ecological data collected using Prop 4 funds are reported to the state and made publicly available. Many of the data currently collected using public dollars are inaccessible, either locked into individual databases, reported to the state but maybe not published, or available only to certain agencies, as Eddie alluded to. So that means that communities are often excluded from decision-making processes. It also means that water managers, researchers, support organizations, and others can't access, synthesize, and learn from these data and adapt their management practices. It ultimately hinders our collective understanding of water systems, critical needs and gaps, and opportunities for integrated management. So when data is publicly available and well-documented, agencies can learn from each other, communities can understand and engage in decisions, and we collectively build trust and are then able to assess trade-offs and adapt how we manage water in changing conditions. And so the groundwater accounting platform is one example of how access to data changes decisions at both the local and regional scale. Platform integrates evapotranspiration data, land use, parcel information, data from multiple public sources, enabling groundwater managers to really track water budgets transparently and then communicate that information to landowners and build trust within their communities. And then our fourth and final recommendation is to establish consistent and practical data standards. And while data standardization may sound relatively straightforward, what we've learned from our experience in this space is that it isn't a technical problem. It really is an institutional one. And so just as a little bit of background, a few years ago, the consortium convened water managers from across the state to align groundwater data reporting standards. We spent several months comparing sort of how different entities reported groundwater level data to the state across regulatory programs. And not surprisingly, we found a lot of inconsistencies in those data. So we pulled together a diverse working group and worked through the details and ultimately developed a sort of coordinated, co-developed set of groundwater level collection and reporting recommendations. Unfortunately, once they had developed them, implementation of those recommendations stalled. And so why did that happen? In part because siloed programs across different agencies weren't really sure about who had authority to move forward. There's no real institutional home for data governance. So good recommendations aren't necessarily automatically adopted. And so this recommendation is really about investing in the institutional capacity to implement data standards once developed. That means building and sustaining collaborative spaces where state and local partners can develop standards and both receive and share technical institute assistance to implement standards once developed. It means clarifying who has authority and ensuring pathways for implementation. And it means funding for the workforce to translate recommendations into operational reality. And so thank you all for listening. I am personally very excited about the panel that we're about to hear from. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Robin.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tara. Thanks for all the speakers thus far. I'm so excited about the panel that we have here. I think, Eddie made some really great points about data infrastructure and the conversation today being not really just about numbers and technical upgrades and things like that, but really fundamentally at its core being about building trust and common understanding amongst groups of people who are all trying to collectively manage our resources more effectively, more sustainably. And I think the panelists that we have with us today are all doing great work in that space. They're all really creative thinkers, and they're all people who understand kind of the human part of this story really, really well. And I'm just super excited for the conversation. So I'll provide a really brief high-level bio for each person, and then we'll get into the questions. So we have Aaron Fukuda with us. He is CEO of the Tulare Irrigation District and the McBride Groundwater Sustainability Agency. He oversees daily operations, promotes conjunctive water use, coordinates regional water efforts, and ensures regulatory compliance. He also happens to sit on DWR's Water Plan New Advisory Committee, which is meeting directly after this town hall. And so I do need to warn the audience that we'll lose Aaron slightly before the actual end time for this town hall. So if you have questions that are urgent for Aaron, make sure you get them in earlier rather than later. We also have Greg Gearheart with us. He's Deputy Director at the California State Water Resource Control Board within the Office of Information Management and Analysis. And prior to that role, he served as the statewide Stormwater Program Manager. He also happens to sit on our steering committee, and we're really grateful for that. Paul Gosselin is Deputy Director for Sustainable Water Management at the California Department of Water Resources. He oversees the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office and the Division of Regional Assistance. Lacey McBride is on our board of directors and is Merced County's Water Resources Manager, focusing on the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in the Merced watershed. and helping to coordinate implementation across the county's 4 groundwater basins. And then finally, we also have Jim Peifer with us. He's Executive Director of the Regional Water Authority and Sacramento Groundwater Authority. And he's previously held numerous leadership and advocacy roles at the state, regional, and local level. So ultimately, all people who are wrestling with data infrastructure at the local and the state level. And again, a huge thank you to all of you for being with us and being willing to share your thoughts and perspectives on this today. I did want to kind of just start out with a bit of a round robin question for all of you. And I'll go in the order that I just introduced you all in. So starting with Erin. And I just would love to hear from you, how your organization or how you personally are doing work to leverage data for climate adaptation and water resilience, and what kind of in the report and the recommendations that Tara just went through aligns with the efforts that you are engaged in currently. So I will start with Erin, and then from Erin, we will go over to Greg.
Thanks, everybody. Happy to be here to talk about data, right? And how we manage that. And in the Kauai Subbasin, we've had to, face our future today. And we've decided to accelerate our sustainability path. And there's been this, when Sigma started, I remember everybody saying, you got 20 years to do this. And we realized we just don't have that. You need to get to sustainability as fast as you can to make that 20-year path easier. So we've implemented, groundwater allocations, cutbacks, projects. We're looking at water quality sampling, and all of those projects and management actions that we're doing use data as the metrics under which we're either allocating, measuring, and directing how the programs are working. So, for instance, in our allocation system, we actually, to put it in place in the time scale that we needed, meters were just not realistic in our region with thousands of wells that were out there. And so we went with the evapotranspiration land IQ system, implemented that platform within 6 months, got grower buy-in by giving them the data, not lofting it on them, but educating them on what it is and what it isn't. Every piece of data has something that it is and it isn't, which can make it dangerous. So we educated everybody on that. Using those tools, growers can evaluate, here's your allocation. How are you going to use that allocation? What is your crop evapotranspirating? How much surface water are you using? How much groundwater are you using? So it really just gives them all that information they need to manage sustainability. It's kind of your measuring stick. Um, Looking at your recommendations, I really felt that collaboration was where the Kauai Subbasin kind of everything rallied around that collaboration. Without it, you're in a silo. What we found is under collaboration, we needed to set a standard for how you measure. Under collaboration, we found that we could have accidentally, like, for instance, in our water quality sampling, we would have been double sampling locations because our water quality foundations under other regulatory programs were already sampling that data. And not only that, we leveraged the water quality staff who has their expertise in water quality where ours is not to do that sampling for us. And then really under that collaboration, you brought a lot of, and it's been said many times here. I think Robin said it, Eddie said it beautifully. The trust in that data is the most important thing you can get. It's hard to get. But when you collaborate with other entities, you collaborate with the landowners, that trust kind of builds its own momentum internally. And then lastly, that collaboration, our data management system that is required under Sigma to report to DWR, all of our data funnels through that DMS. And so we have one repository. You don't go to one site to get one thing, another site to get another thing. You can come to that one DMS, get water quality, water levels, subsidence. And in the background, administratively, we're managing the more data intensive stuff like modeling and everything else in the background. So kind of how our approach is in the Kauai Subbasin and within the Mid-Kauai and Tulare ID.
Awesome. Thank you for all of that, Erin. And I know Sigma has sort of forced upon so many folks some really hard but also really meaningful conversations about data and shared data and what works for everybody to align around. So kudos to you and the hard work you've done in that space. I'll move over to Greg and let you give us some insights from the state board's perspective.
Hi, everyone. First of all, that was a really comprehensive and great response, Aaron. I know we had a prep meeting, but I was amazed at the way that it all sort of tied together and the drivers that are affecting that side of the system. I work obviously for the state, and the state has a whole different sort of history and lens when it comes to this data ecosystem. My role 12 years ago when I took this job suddenly became to be an evangelist essentially for open water data because of both the pressures of the world, and then along came a statute that required the state of California water agencies to publish their water data as open data. And that's a huge learning curve. We're actually still trying to there's folks that are still trying to figure out what that means within the state organizations. And the idea with that is to really grow, if you will, bear with me on this metaphor, an economy of water data, so that as we open up and make access to more and more data sets and more drivers of new information are available, both from science and the other sort of drivers that affect this data ecosystem, we're hopefully improving the way that use and reuse again of that data improves everyone's sort of outlook and opportunities. And so, we have a lot of types of data at the Water Board. I'm surrounded on this panel by amazing folks from the water use and water supply and water availability kind of a lens. But at the Water Board, we have a lot of sort of administrative regulatory data, a lot of water quality monitoring data, both groundwater and surface water. We have financial assistance data, and we have drivers and controls that we can do to sort of add to those sort of pools of different resources in this ecosystem or economy, if you will. And so I think, when the proposition came along, it's a great example of another opportunity from my view. I think our organization's intersection with the topic of climate change is huge, but when it comes to this particular funding driver source, and then you look at the portfolio of all the funding at the Water Board, this is not like the big thing on the plate right now. We're not as big of a player in the Prop 4, but we are very interested. I'm very interested in seeing how we can drive better data and open data arriving into this ecosystem by way of these kinds of grant-driven, contract-driven opportunities. These are really, the public puts trust in getting the most value out of the money that's being dispersed to folks for projects. And one of the current ways of measuring value is sort of this residual called data, because it could be useful to future projects. It could be useful to future community needs and all sorts of other things. And so I feel like there's a real learning curve and sort of an experimental mindset that we want to bring to this opportunity of Prop 4 availability to drive new data sets. And I'm looking particularly at a little bit bigger themes than just the water availability. But I do think, that's huge. And, I know that within my organization, we have invested lots and lots of things. I kind of laughed when Aaron talked about the single place that has all the data. That's kind of the opposite of the Water Board in some ways. We're working on that, and we're trying to make rapid progress towards sort of a more open and unified data warehouse approach to a lot of these different data sets. But I know it's top of mind with my board and my executive colleagues, especially right now with a pending water crisis looking at us. I don't know if it's being called the future drought yet, but it's top of mind because we need to make sure that we're doing our best to make transparent decisions and also share what we have with the rest of the world.
Thanks so much, Greg. And I loved the term used and reused and reuse. And I feel like, Aaron, you even touched upon that when you spoke to your discovery that some of the water quality metrics you were looking to measure and understand are already being collected by other parties. And so I think that's a really important theme as we think about the value of data and the value and sort of like unforeseen potential benefits down the road. Okay, I think that's over to you, Paul, from there, and after Paul, so that you can be ready as Lacey.
Thanks. Thanks. It's really great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to come in here to talk about data and the recommendations. I do want to go back to what Eddie described at the beginning because I was ready to come in and just talk about the data and sort of the things that we have going on with different aspects. But really, that point about the trust and building that understanding with a wide range of constituents is really, really important. And you can imagine with some of the data we have that's gotten very advanced over the last decade, trying to just present that out with modeling data. And we've heard from growers and others have gone in and listened to just modeling data and other sort of things. And it's not engaging and it's hard to believe it, especially if it's going to impact you. And so there's a question about what came out of that black box. So it had me thinking about some of the programs we started, community well monitoring program. We were targeting disadvantaged communities where they're actually going in, monitoring their well, and actually we can take that data and incorporate it into CDEC and in our data system. So what it does is aligns individuals with collecting their own data so they understand what their well that is so intimate, how to monitor that and get familiar with that and knowing their data is part of the bigger data set. And it also helps us getting more data points, particularly on shallow wells. So that has so many positive aspects for the long haul to have more people engaged in the process and understanding the data, and then having a lot more strength and power to be able to use the data. And just thinking and going back over the last 10 years, the increased amount of data we have has really helped us, in climate and drought resiliency, trying to be able to do a lot more prediction and forecasting, both on flood and drought, which, the last 5 years we've really started to bridge those two with the data sets and our understanding about the swings that are happening with climate that go between drought and in extreme weather events. So forecasting's one. And we've also seen the data that we get from local agencies and GSAs start to get incorporated in some of the reports that we have coming out. So semi-annual groundwater status report, you just saw Bulletin 118 come out. We rely and increasingly rely on growers' annual reports to come out with statewide differences in change in storage and some of the other information. So that work that local agencies doing now are getting incorporated into a statewide lens, which is, again, really powerful because we have over 300 agencies locally. Even though some of the data is required to be reported, now it's actually, I think, one of the more frustrating things for local agencies is producing information to the state and just wondering if it's just going in a file. So I think it's really incumbent upon us. If we're going to ask for data, we better use it and better show people how we're using it and make it more transparent. And then again, this all fits into watershed resiliency, tying all these pieces and data together and again, drought. So I'll leave that there as just sort of a snapshot of where the department's at on data and integration for climate change and resiliency. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paul. And I just wanted to kind of highlight one thing that you talked about, I think, or a couple of your comments brought to mind for me some of the work to do in terms of capacity building and workforce development and just kind of building more familiarity and comfort with data and data management and data collection across the state. And I do think that's something that is sort of integrated into a lot of the report's recommendations and thinking, but doesn't rise to the top as one of those high level recommendations. So I'm glad that you alluded to it. And I think hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to talk a little bit more on that piece. Lacey, over to you.
Thanks, Robin. So I'm the water resources manager for Merced County, and through that role, I provide support to like the Merced Subbasin GSA and other county managed GSAs. And so the water resilience and kind of supporting data priorities that rise to the top for me all surround Sigma and implementing the policies that address the goals. of Sigma. And I think even more importantly, having the data to back up the either like hit or miss of those policies in achieving the goals. The themes in the report around investing in enabling conditions and funding data as essential infrastructure really resonate. I think the recommendations on ensuring that data reporting is cost effective is super important, and streamlined and made publicly available. And all of that aligns with the GSA's priorities to support this like planning, this agency planning that they're doing. So like Aaron talked about, we're putting together these really difficult to implement programs like allocations or addressing subsidence. And we're starting with some identified data gaps already. And so having that public data to back up the policies in the beginning, and then having the continuing to collect the data in a publicly accessible and usable form that would show that these programs that we're putting into place, one, that they're necessary, and two, that they're working. I think that's critical to public acceptance and success of the programs that the GSAs are putting into place.
Great. Thank you, Lacey. And yeah, I think that's the sort of evaluation and learning component or value of data is a really big piece of it too. So thanks for bringing that to the table. Okay, Jim, you get to close out this opening question.
All right. Okay. So I am a GSA manager myself. I won't say the same things that Aaron and Lacey did that they really covered really well. What I do want to highlight though is the RWA is a member of the Water Forum. My colleague is here today in the audience, Ashley Casey, Executive Director of the Water Forum, and I do want to do a shout out. She oversaw a recent renewal of the Water Forum. And we celebrated this week the signing of the Water Forum 2050 agreement. The work of the Water Forum is looking towards the future, and particularly climate change, which is going to be very impactful. I'll probably talk a little bit later on about it. But Eddie Ocampo's introductory comments really resonated with me, and those are some of the challenges that we are working through with the Water Forum and how to get to yes in terms of water management with several stakeholder groups, the environmental NGOs in our region, water agency, business groups, and the like. The Water Forum is the organization that does that. And its attention is being turned to how to collect the data and present it so people have a common understanding of the challenges that they're being solved. The same set of data is being used, and we're working through those issues. With respect to the report, we were thinking about those things. Again, my colleague Ashley Casey has retained a consultant to help with the data development portion of the implementation of the Water Forum Agreement. At the same time, the report was very thought-provoking and addressed some things that I'm not sure that we were thinking about. We were thinking about the investment, and that is necessary, but the people-oriented and the other elements of it are very important and shouldn't be overlooked. Data science, data scientist, being very thoughtful and intentional about acquiring the data, sharing it. We have multiple different organizations within this region that we need to share it with. Others need to access it too. And the report was really helpful for that. Thanks, Robin.
Thanks so much, Jim. Okay, well, we're going to come right back to you, actually. So going to move now into another set of questions. And I will encourage everyone that's in attendance to please, I think a couple folks are already doing it, but please go ahead and, if you're thinking of questions as we have this conversation with our panelists, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll do our best to get around to as many as we can. So don't feel like you have to wait till the end. So, Aaron, you touched on it quite a bit, the idea of kind of the importance of regional coordination and the efficiencies that can be realized there, but also sort of the trust building and alignment piece and how important that is, and that there's, real work to do just on the coordination front, and that attention and care should be given to that piece. And Jim, I wanted to just come right back to you with this question first, then we'll go to some other panelists as well. You've kind of described before the RDBA's sort of shared services model, and that how that kind of creates real efficiencies for your member entities. And I just wondered if you had an example you could speak to there, and if you have some thoughts about the relevance of that model and kind of the data sharing and data coordination space as well.
I do. I'd be happy to share some of those. So the Regional Water Authority is an organization. It's a joint powers authority of 20 water agencies within the region. And what it does is it puts together programs which the water agencies in the region can participate in. And what it does is it spreads the cost amongst the agencies to make the program more cost effective. An example of this is we have a geologist on staff, and our member agencies do not have to hire a geologist on their own, on their own payroll. They get to share the cost of this particular very knowledgeable geologist amongst all of them. And it's really helpful to have a geologist on staff when you're working through groundwater issues, groundwater modeling, and the like. We also have a water use efficiency program. We have an advocacy program, and I see that this is an opportunity also for data to think through and make sure that we have the programs and platforms that, again, all of them can participate in a very efficient way to acquire it, utilize it, be able to have other people have access to that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jim. Okay, so then kind of going to the other panelists, I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to where you see remaining opportunities. I know, Aaron, you spoke to a lot of work that's already happened in this space, but where you see remaining opportunities within your entities, or for the folks that are coming to us from the more local or regional perspective within your basin, say, to kind of build out more coordination and kind of sharing of data resources. And if there's any kind of component of that relates to sort of the capacities to do so, like the workforce development angle that we already sort of alluded to. So I'll start with Aaron and Lacey, but Paul and Greg would welcome, your perspective on this from the state's perspective as well. So Lacey or Aaron, either one of you want to jump in first?
It's a standoff. I'll go ahead with take the standoff. And I think it came up in the questions right now. I think in our sub-basin, it's as we look forward to this, all this data that you need, collecting data is one step, housing data is the next step, analyzing the data is the last step, and then analyzing the data and turning it into actionable outcomes is the last step, right? So, I mean, we are looking at strategies on that workforce development. Do you have the staffing levels and the knowledge to collect the data? We're looking at opportunities for more remote monitoring on certain elements, and then more hands-on in others, and efficiently managing that. So right now, I currently have 2 staff members at my GSA. A lot of their job is to do all that data collection and all that kind of stuff for us. Again, we've leveraged other programs in our sub-basin. So we're looking at that. We've also looked at developing that workforce internally within the Kuya sub-basin. We're looking at some pretty draconian outcomes if we achieve sustainability, right? I don't think at least in the Kuya, we've taken a realistic approach to what the future looks like under sustainability, and it's not what we're currently looking at socially or economically within our communities. So there's been a lot of chatter about converting over to solar and other things. We don't think that's going to realistically happen in the same time frame. So how do we transition our workforce into things that we actually are going to see happen and need? And we need people in our space and water data collection. So we're working on a workforce training center that would help us almost create our own labor force that could help us manage this data, be more technical, thought provocative on how to use that data into implementable action. So I think that's the space where we're headed. What I see Prop 4 can help us do is develop some of those streams of workforce, but you can't use grants to buy, to staff, but grants can help us develop the infrastructure, like your recommendations are, then we invest in the staff to get the data out of the infrastructure. So I think that's where Prop 4 feeds those two things. DWR brings the funding for the infrastructure. We bring the funding for the staff and the monitoring.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it back to the Prop 4 context. That's helpful, Aaron. Lacey, anything to add on this one?
Yeah, I'd just say in the Merced subbasin, we talk a lot about staffing. We talk a lot about staffing and what the GSA is going to need going forward. They need the capacity, like Aaron said, to not only collect the data, but also process it and translate it. And is that one person who can do it all, or is that multiple people? I think the board would love it to be one person. I don't think it's one person who can do all that unless they're a really talented person. I think the GSA is careful to be really good stewards of the tax dollars that they collect. And so they're looking for processes and systems, maybe automation that could help keep costs as low as possible, but they also need this expertise to interpret the data. It's interesting to hear Jim talk about the staff sharing that they're working on, because really recently we've had somebody float the idea of sharing staff between GSAs who are in different basins. And so, provided there is no conflict, both GSAs would have this expertise that they needed, but perhaps in a more cost-effective manner. But sharing in, I think across different basins is just a really interesting idea. So we'll see how that plays out, but it's kind of similar to what Jim's talking about, is starting to share staff just in order to make it work.
Yeah, that's
Well,
really interesting, Lacey. Go ahead,
Robin,
Aaron.
I forgot to add the most important thing. It just my brain and Lacey brought, as you're hiring people, as much as the quality of the data is, you have to hire quality people. And what we found is that you're using data to make decisions. You're giving data to landowners. They come in with a ton of questions, and a lot of them are having to use that data, and they're paying based upon that data, or they're being penalized based upon that data. And so what we found is the quality of the people makes the biggest difference in the data sharing and the collaboration, because if they can't communicate and they can't translate that data into real action, you actually create mistrust and damage, and then you never, in the ag world at least, once you lose trust, you lost your program. It's over. You never gain it back. So we've been very conscientious about the quality of the people we invest in.
Yeah. Yeah, great points. Greg and Paul, anything that you want to add to that?
Just
Real quick.
go ahead, Greg.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go. You hit it.
I'll be quick. I want to echo what Aaron and Lacey said, and Jim, and really talk about what quality means from our perspective. I think, we hire engineers, scientists, geologists, research data specialists. We have 2,500 employees at the Water Board. There's a lot of churn. We do data literacy surveys, and I'm watching this trend of more and more people are coming in with skills to do data science as sort of like their background. Like what used to be word processing, presentation, and spreadsheet skills is now like R code, Python, experience with Power BI, and things like that. So what quality means to us is building on that the facilitation, interest-based approach skills, data ethics, so that, like we have a equity handbook for data that's getting socialized within the organization, so that people, as they're doing their work, they're aligning their projects and their interfacing, because data becomes this new currency in everything that we do. They're interfacing with the mindset and the skills needed to essentially listen, meet communities where they're at, and do a lot of that sort of basic what used to be called soft skills and techniques. It's what we're calling that sort of extra that is needed to get the job done. So just want to add that.
Yeah, that's great. And I was just going to add, following up on just the economies of scale. I think it's great, sort of haven't heard the sharing of staff between basins, and not totally uncommon, Lacey, for counties on call centers in some areas where they'll do it regionally for like kind of actions within a region or county. So there's a lot of good precedent for that. Makes a lot of sense. And I think this is something I think looking ahead for more acquisition of data, the more use of it, and a lot of agencies are a lot smaller than the ones here, and we have a carve out in Prop 4 for small GSAs. And that doesn't mean height. I'm 5'6", so I wouldn't fit that bill. But we have some basins that pump less than 10,000 acre feet and is subject to Sigma. So you can do the math. Just you know, putting just the price to keep the lights on, it's very difficult. So I think this is something we should also just on a regional aspect, but just the economies of scale be real mindful for. So we'll be looking for anything in the grant guidance comes out, and I'll talk a little bit later about that. Ideas and concepts to incorporate into the grant guidance.
Great, and thanks so much for your openness on that, Paul. And I know you guys are doing a lot of listening and conversations right now as you develop those, and that's just so wonderful to see. So I'm sure folks here will take you up on that. I do want to come back to you and Greg actually now, because one of the things the report does call for are stronger pathways for data sharing and publication across grant-funded projects. And I know Greg, especially, you're doing a lot of work, at the state board on ensuring that the capacities and templates and sort of the roadmap is there to ensure that the connection between data collected locally and the state's sort of publication and sharing of that data and eventually sort of putting that data to good use. You're working hard to kind of strengthen those pathways, but I'm just curious, if you could speak a little bit to what you see as the ongoing need and challenge there. Like what are some of the barriers, what are some of the opportunities to strengthen that pathway from data collected to sort of data being published, accessible, really useful on the state, in the state's hands.
Yeah, so the water board, we didn't get any additional resources to implement AB 1755, and nor did really anyone to do this. And so what that means is that as a state agency being asked to do that, it's just a new way of doing business with your existing resources. So we've spent a lot of time to try to train resources, build workflows, improve workflows, make efficiencies so that data that comes into our sort of data lifecycle is touched as minimal as possible so that it can then become published as accessible open data. Of course, governing it all along the way. And the governance part is like not trivial, and it's getting more and more complicated, especially as we're moving towards sort of a unified warehouse of all of our data and a place where people can sort of see all the data and start synthesizing and playing with it with not only their own program, but maybe other program data, and having all these really good insights that our board and the public is asking. So like that whole more towards that more complex water board ecosystem is taking a lot. And it's funny, like it's not free data, it's free to use at the end of it, but the amount of work that goes into producing published open metadata, open water data with all the metadata and stuff is huge. Starting at the source of the GSAs and the other folks that are preparing it and submitting it, and then all of the staff time at the state agencies. So I think from the opportunity, I'm painting that picture in great detail because I think we're at this amazing transition point, a little scary as well, with automation, machine learning, AI, to improve those workflows so that with the human touch and some of the confidence that we need, we can really dramatically improve the speed with which data comes in and goes out as open data, but also reduce the amount of work that it takes and the cost, really. Because everyone's paying that cost, and yeah, it's probably worth it, but we're still in this experimental phase where I couldn't tell you. I estimate to sometimes that we have 8% of the water board data available published as open water data, and is it the best 8%? Probably not. So like we have a lot to learn as a state to try to improve all this. Yeah.
I'm surprised that AI hadn't come up yet. So thanks for the obligatory mention and bringing it into the conversation. Go ahead, Paul.
I'm sure a couple of the chat bots that are running right now, they'll probably have comments about why haven't you brought us up yet?
Yeah,
Why aren't you talking about us?
right.
Yeah, build on what Greg was saying too. I do want to give a shout out. I think Chris McCready's on from the department leading effort and the whole department. And I think thinking about it, you know, challenges we have. One, we have legacy data, and that we all always have a lot of challenges figuring like how do we convert that? Because different agencies or different programs will have it orchestrated a little different way, and someone's going to have to give. So we're kind of stymied on some of those, but a lot of the new data sets or more recent data sets, have really met the mark. And I'm looking at, Cal Groundwater Live, which has just been expanding out. And that's a great source of a wide variety of groundwater data that's easily accessible, which is real important. And then again, a lot of the data sets going into forecasting, and a lot of that survey work and others is just critically important for health and safety and community resilience. So, I think we're in a good spot, but it's like a lot of things on legacy data sets, converting them over are always going to be a challenge cost wise and just, just people tied to their data too. It's hard to take something and have it shifted and morphed off, and then avoiding unintended consequences because everyone's pulled data sets together for a lot of good reasons, and then trying to break that down and have it be floated up for other good reasons for integration can lose something. So we need to be all mindful of that.
Yeah, well, and especially in the AI context, right? The importance of sort of well-documented,
Yeah.
well-governed data so that its interpretation is appropriate and fair, and sort of well translated. So, well, appreciate all of that. I wanted to kind of move into the sort of implementation space, thinking more directly, and Aaron, you kind of brought back into the Prop 4 context as well. And so kind of building off of your thoughts on where the opportunities were in this current moment and looking ahead to Prop 4's implementation. Um, Aaron, I mean, I guess this question could be for all of you, but I guess starting with Aaron and Lacey and Jim, is there anything, to Paul's point about the listening ear that the agencies have right now as they're building out the grant guidelines? Is there anything that you would really want to impress upon the granting entities about, what your needs are in terms of the data infrastructure on the ground and how it actually works and what your challenges are? Um, or even more specifically, like if there's if you could sort of design a data related incentive in some way. And one thing we really want to emphasize with this report and this work is, we see that there's a lot of fatigue around data collection and reporting. And, obviously, we believe very wholeheartedly that there's a whole bunch of opportunity around data's use and the sharing of data and the collaboration and trust building and sort of innovation that unlocks. And so we would love to see this opportunity with Prop 4 kind of result in, or at least move us more into a sense of opportunity and possibilities with data and away from this sort of fatigue that some people are feeling. And so I think that context all in mind, would just be curious, what would you love to see better enabled in terms of this particular context in Prop 4 or otherwise from public funding? I'll let you duke it out as to who goes first.
Robin, I'd love to answer this, but Aaron has a time constraint, so I
Yeah.
was hoping that he would go first.
Okay. Yeah. Oh shoot. Okay. I was looking up to gather my thoughts. As far as the Prop 4 funding and DWR, I mean, let's just be realistic. The amount of money that's going to come out is woefully less than what's going to be needed, right? So there's going to be an extreme amount of pressure to focus the money on implementation. But in implementing, you have to measure how effective that implementation is. I mean, we all have projects that we think are the best. Without a measuring stick, we'll continue to say they're the best, but the results may not be there, right? And so, I think Prop 4 has an opportunity to uh, do invest in the infrastructure needed to do the metrics to say, oh, I implemented a groundwater recharge project, and we're seeing the benefits. The risk is that the monitoring system or the measurement stick doesn't show the results, but I don't know if the recipient should be held accountable. You can't say, here's a grant to build a project, we're going to measure and it doesn't work, we're going to take the money back. But what I think is if the applicant were to be given, or the applicant puts in a monitoring plan system with some measurement within reason, that the investment in that would get them some bonus points. So it's an incentive to have data part of your project. In return for that, you get a little bit of bonus points and you get elevated in your application process.
So look, Aaron brought up a real good one that had me thinking about some of the projects that are going to come in. And largely the lion's share, I think, is going to be a lot of recharge projects. So the question is, we don't, unlike other data, if somebody put in a monitoring well, that's pretty locked in. People kind of know, what the deal, how to report in. But for recharge, I don't think there's a consistent way that's laid out on how you're going to report or determine performance on recharge. People have a lot of ideas. It's not impossible, but I don't think there's a level of consistency we would get from people who get recharge dollars, and we want to know performance-wise for a whole variety of reasons. How did that perform? And so that's a question maybe I'll put back is, do you have thoughts as practitioners, the ones who are doing this, is that a worthy topic that we should consider in grant guidance or just future and how we get reports back on recharge? And we do get it in annual reports and we take it at face value, but we're not really sure behind there how each agency is making that call.
I would say Prop 4 has the opportunity to require or request, or if you get the extra points, you need to supply a monitoring plan. And so each local agency will provide you with how we intend to measure that metric. You take all of those and create a BMP based upon what you see coming out of this round, right? So you can gather. Lacey's region may do it differently because of logistics, all that. Jim may have a different approach to it. And it is regionally could be different, but a hole in the ground doing recharge is usually a hole in the ground doing recharge everywhere. But you could use our monitoring plans to describe what a BMP would look like for all of us in the future. So
Yeah, so I have some thoughts on this, and Lacey, I don't know if you want to go first or you want me to tackle this. Okay, so it'd be really helpful if there was a set of standards, and I feels like the report brought this out a little bit more, but standards for data and identifying how that's done. What is reportable? How do we measure this in a way that you can apply statewide, but also at the same time is unique to the region that's doing it? And I feel like we can get there, but we need to make that investment in that, and also the acquisition of that data. I just feel like we can do a better job. I would say that we've probably been underreporting the recharge in the American River region, largely because we did not know how much was being lost, or at least contributions to streams. Now we have information on this.
Mm-hmm.
That's an important data source. I would say that today, compared to a baseline of 30 years ago, the American River has about 15,000 acre feet more in base flow than 30 years ago when we started our recharge efforts. Really important. That's an important data source. It's important to know where that water goes, who it accrues to. Interestingly, it accrues to the Bureau of Reclamation and the State Department of Water Resources for a variety of reasons. That's really helpful. That's a modest but meaningful amount of water. I live in the city of Davis that uses 11,000 acre feet a year. That's 15,000 acre feet. So that's quite a chunk of water. all this is underlined by data, the data acquisition, and also the standards that we apply. So I think we can better manage water if we have that data. I also want to put the plug in for the investment in the data systems. We're going to need it to help implement our water resilience plan that we recently received a draft or a grant from the Department of Water Resources. What does that investment get you? It gets you incentives for better water management. It helps to address stream flow depletion factors, another opportunity ripe for investment in data acquisition, analyzing it, and improving upon that. And then lastly, it's great that we all woke up this morning and have water come out of our taps and stuff like that. The toilets flushed, really, really good. So we're getting our job done there. But I would say there's so much more opportunity to innovate in water. In many ways, we operate water systems like we did 80 years ago. And with the opening up of data, we could really rethink how we do it and bring the opportunity for innovation, which governments struggle with, but academia, think tanks, NGOs help to move that along quite a bit. They have their thoughts. I know that many of you have seen that. It can help with the innovation process, which we structurally just struggle with in California water, largely because it's comfortable to do the things that we've been doing in the past. Data helps to elucidate the ideas there and move those forward. And that investment also allows that to occur too. Thanks.
Thanks. Getting some hand claps going across the screen there, Jim. Lacey, anything you want to add to the thoughts from Aaron and Jim on this?
Yeah, I'd second what Aaron and Jim said, and I would also just mention that the report talks about investing in the collaborative open source models. In Merced, we were fortunate to be able to participate in the groundwater accounting platform, and so our two largest GSAs are part of that, and a landowner, a property owner in either of them can log in and see the parcel-based data, their consumption data, no matter what GSA they're in, or if they're in both GSAs. And I think it's really been a kind of a game changer for us to be able to share that parcel-based data transparently to the property owners. I think it's cost effective for the GSA. We're sharing in these costs going forward with other participants who are building out like this platform. And so joining in that collaborative effort has been just one of the best decisions I think we made back in like 2023. And so I would be interested in seeing other opportunities like that are funded by the state. And I don't know what that looks like today, but I think just being open to that would be really important too. Beneficial.
Robin,
Yeah.
can I say one other thing? Because I feel like I'm in hot water already with Paul on this one, but managing surface water 80 years ago, groundwater has really taken some strides. So I just want to clean that up a little bit.
Well, great. I think, there was another question or two that I could ask, but given Aaron, that I know we're going to lose you sort of earlier rather than later, I did want to bring in Savannah Shaden here has put a comment or a sort of half question, half comment into the chat that I think follows on, some of the recommendations that you had, which I thought were really compelling around is there an opportunity to sort of advance best management practices through the collection of an understanding of everyone's kind of various monitoring and accounting approaches in the Prop 4 context. So I thought that was really interesting. And Savannah wrote here, I wonder if there are opportunities to standardize these success metrics or monitoring plans around projects across programs like multi-benefit land repurposing program, grant funding, internal GSA accounting. Could that also help streamline reporting for local agencies? So just curious if any of the panelists had any thoughts to add to that or in reaction.
I think it's a noble idea and it's worth exploring in maybe some pilot approaches with like thematic areas? Like, do we have examples in California where performance metrics or questionnaires designed to capture data around performance on some types of projects has already been done? And would it be available and useful to sort of like make that like the front end driving the way that data is collected for those? I think my brain starts to explode thinking about all the different types of projects that Prop 4 may be driving, and then how nuanced performance analysis and evaluation would be for each project, let alone categories of projects. But I think where there might be some low-hanging fruit, it would be worth, again, I have an experimental mindset because this is iterative in my view.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind too is thinking about the variety of projects we may get requests for on Prop 4, and then trying to front load what we may be surprised with the different projects. I don't know. It's almost one, either if we know certain data to set up, and I think we've done a fairly decent job with reporting portals to make it easier for just submission of data into the system that can get easily integrated. But I think some of this may be either designed up front, but also once we get applications in to see what the lay of the land is and where those connections are, may have to be another step.
Okay.
I would add that success is also hard to measure sometimes in the groundwater world. Surface water, maybe the metrics is, water added, but in the groundwater world, we're finding the metric for success is muddled by regional issues and not being able to see anything below your feet, right?
And I think too, it can be confounding. I think Jim has a great example about all the recharge work they did and found that they actually provided a lot of water to, stream flow, which, some people would view as, oh, putting water in the ground and ends up back in the stream. But in actuality, accounting for it's important, but also there's a benefit there, so there's benefits around both temporarily in the groundwater basin and then also for creeks and streams. And then trying to measure and quantify that, one, you need better data, and two, it's can get complicated.
Hate to throw the other difficult one in the hopper too, but you look at groundwater, but when we look at habitat benefits, those are really hard to determine. And we've talked to economists that do it, and you think groundwater's tough. I mean, that stuff flies right over my head when they start talking about measuring habitat benefit by food, sources and stuff. So you're measuring aviary impact by food sources, but those are those are really difficult.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that the AB 1755 10 years ago named water and ecological data, because it's really hard to kind of separate them out in our management. I did want to bring up that there's a lot of folks kind of pointing to something that's already been mentioned, which is just the real struggles and capacity constraints that smaller system operators and GSAs are facing. And Eddie's comments really early on in this town hall resonated for a bunch of us, so I'm going to read his specific question on this. And he asks, as Prop 4 investments roll out, what do you feel would be the most important way that we can use funding to build foundation water data sets, especially for small systems or domestic well communities, so that data is trusted, usable, and supports local decision making? Sorry for the compound question. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I don't know if this will get Eddie, if this will get to the point, but we do have some carve-outs in Prop 4 that the legislature put in last August. One was underrepresented community technical assistance program, the URTCA. So that's technical assistance. There's not going to be grants, and it was intended out to NGO communities, small growers, and so we're kind of designing that in a way for as a GSA support, but it's really to link the trust and understanding of the process. So we see that maybe as an opportunity, and the funding for small growers almost to get some technical assistance going up front.
I'd like to add to that, and that is I hope this doesn't get lost, but if there's something that you can do for economy of scale in regionalizing the data acquisition, I think that there's some real value in that, and thinking through how you can do that and also leverage the opportunities to obtain the data, again, good quality data.
Yeah.
We do that through many of our member agencies. We do that through other sources. Sometimes we have our own staff go out and get water measurements and stuff like that. There's all sorts of opportunities there that I think could be brought to bear in this economy of scale type model that I hope to impress upon you to consider.
Yeah, and I don't think this was covered in the April 30th workshop. We had a great turnout, a lot of good comments and opinions that got put in. But wondering about this, because we are usually open to having regional applications come in with many partners on a like topic, which is good. I'm wondering, should there be additional points for people that come on a regional project versus others? So that's the question, is sort of like, we're open to this, but how would we incentivize and really promote it? Because, sometimes it's not the easiest thing to do to go run around and get some partners, and then somebody's got to carry the load on the grant application and administering it on behalf of everyone else. And Aaron's smirking.
It sounds like my senior project.
So I like that, building off that last idea. I think I have particular experience with both good, bad, and ugly driving regional monitoring programs across different scales. And I think the role of the state is tricky in that, but it can be done. There's definitely success models out there. And I'm going to put a plug out for a named entity in our community, Earth Genome, and the work that they're doing is really cool way to think about using available remote sensing data and algorithms to sort of monitor change in features on the landscape in a way that might get towards this idea of performance metrics on some projects. Not every project is going to lend itself to that, but like that's a great example of maybe there's a way to sort of like scale up the effort of performance evaluation and data collection that doesn't put the burden on each individual project to do its own thing. So that's just an example, but it's also a plug for a cool product that the Earth Index is the one I'm talking about, Earth Genome's product.
Well, I'm glad you just brought up sort of another type of entity. We've been really focusing the conversation a lot around potential grantees, and then also the granting agencies. But of course, there's also, Tara brought up the statewide support entity for the multi-benefit land repurposing program, and that is supported by Environmental Defense Fund and self-help, I believe. And I think that's a model to be kind of considering in this broader conversation, right? Are there roles for sort of support entities to help with implementing some of these concepts and ideas, and standing in partnership with grantees and local entities in this work? We did get a sort of specific question around, whether the climate bond programs could issue grants specifically for data infrastructure. And the example given was a grant for building or improving an existing public data explorer that would track habitat restoration projects and the benefits targeted, kind of to the point you made, Aaron, about how difficult that is. Grants could then require that grantees upload monitoring data to the shared database. So curious if anyone wants to respond to that question. Probably Paul, mostly for you.
Yeah, I think that we spent a considerable amount of time with our legal office and trying to interpret the language and what was covered, not covered, and it does heavily lean towards implementation projects in a competitive way. So I think that would be sort of those descriptions of those kind of projects. I would get those in, have us evaluate, and then that would, ensure things that may be on the margin could get evaluated up front for inclusion into the grant guidance. So, so people don't get stuck coming in with really good creative ideas and then us evaluating and say, it didn't fit the guidance. So I think we want to hear those kind of ideas and concepts in during the scoping period.
Well, I see Aaron sort of packing up, and so I want to give him a chance to say any last words or a goodbye. And thank you again so much, Aaron, for being here and all the perspective and creative thinking you bring. And I also feel like, Paul, you've really segued really nicely into the next Menti poll we wanted to pose to the audience. So, Aaron, over to you
And
to.
before Aaron leaves, I want to give a plug to that needs to be brought up today for the new water plan SB 72 that's targeting 9 million acre feet. So that's going to drive a lot of actions and a lot of data. So
Yeah.
go get them, Aaron.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I just wanted to thank, being a part of this. I'm looking at this and I said data, 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 and I had this. I remember I gave a data presentation. It had Marsha Brady, Marsha, data, 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 and I commend Robin and Tara and the Water Data Consortium because, data is going to be how we make our decisions. I mean, we can't use this whole windage. We used to just put are we headed in the right direction? We don't have the time and we don't have the money available to make windage decisions, is what I tell my board. You've got to make calculated decisions. And and it is hard. Data is definitely, as you get into it, it becomes more difficult to understand, collect, manage, and use. But I challenge everybody on the call to that data challenges, lean into that data, spend time with it, understand it, because I don't know anybody else that has argued with me on this, but you take on these big challenges, the rewards on the other side are greater than the low-hanging fruit stuff. So take on the tough challenge early, right? Get over it. And then at the other side, usually there's something fun, like a glass of whiskey, or at my age nowadays, it's low calorie, non-fat ice cream or something like that.
Few
So
almonds, maybe.
so I do apologize, but like Paul said, it's an important meeting coming up. I got to get there a little early. We'll see you guys.
Thank you so much again, Aaron. So we've been kind of posting the question to our panelists, and some of you have asked them about, you know, what might be possible within the Prop 4 context. We'd love to sort of turn that question back to the audience a little bit. And so I think Elisa's going to switch the screen over, and she's put a link to our next Mentimeter poll. And the question here is, what aspects for you of data collection, management, sharing, or application are really critical to climate adaptation and yet are really difficult to fund? So you kind of answered a question earlier about what you're struggling with and what your challenges are. This question takes it in a slightly different way, and we really want to hear from you sort of what is the most difficult aspect of this to find support to do? Because that's something that kind of collectively as a state, we need to be sure we're addressing. And maybe another way to think about this question for those of you who are potential grantees in the Prop 4 context is if granting programs were to indicate a willingness to fund regional or local data infrastructure, things like monitoring, coordination on data standards, data management capacity, accounting tools, what kinds of data center projects would you be proposing to that grant? Exactly to Paul's question, right? Like what types of proposals might the state be seeing in that space then? And what really feels like the most urgent data related need for you, your organization, or your region right now? So this is an open-ended question. It's always a little bit awkward and difficult as a moderator to put these out there because it takes some more time and awkward silence for people to answer, but we're going to give you that time. I think there's also a possibility to upvote other folks' responses. So I'm not sure exactly how that works. Maybe Elisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're able to put thumbs up on things that other people are writing as well. And again, such a sincere thank you. And it's great to start seeing this page be populated. And we'll make sure that these ideas don't just end here, and that we do some work to kind of collate and share back out after the fact, after this town hall. Um, and so I think another maybe minute or so to write some responses, and then maybe another 30 seconds to upvote if you'd like to. And I welcome the panelists as well. If you're seeing anything here that you'd like to remark on or sort of follow up on, please feel free to do that. But we'll give everybody another minute or two here. I see some things coming up that we've already talked about, like performance evaluation of recharge efforts, for example. And I'm appreciating a point of the importance of communities of practice, early coordination around data standards.
So Robin, this is Jim. I'd like to maybe address that a little bit with something that we've been doing in our region when the time is right. I just wanted to tie together the need and also Prop 4, but with our watershed resilience project that we've just completed and how data fits into that.
Great. Okay. Well, I'll circle back to you. I see some comments, Elisa, that folks are not able to upvote. I don't know if we need to move on to kind of the next. Oh, there we go. Start voting. Yeah. So you all should have the ability now to vote, and then we'll get a sense of kind of who wins the popularity contest in in the responses here. And maybe, Jim, while folks are voting, if you'd like to sort of speak to what you were just alluding to.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I'm going to drop a message in the chat though, or a link to in the chat to what I'm about to talk about. So we received a grant from the Department of Water Resources to prepare what's called a watershed resilience report, and it identifies the challenges that we are going to experience with climate change, quantify those, qualify those, and identify adaptation strategies and actions to address them. I dropped the link in the chat. We're one of 5 watersheds in California that received a grant. And I'll just talk about some good news and bad news. The good news is the amount of precipitation that we can expect in the American River region is not going to change that much. Bad news is it's really going to change fundamentally of how we experience it. It's going to be more rain than snow. We'll lose 60% of our snowpack by mid-century and 80% by the end of century. A doubling of extreme heat days, a doubling of catastrophic flood risk. That's the bad news. The good news is we have a plan for adapting to that. And it identifies a number of actions. One of them is a data action, and I'd like to read it to the audience. In terms of this is out of 120 actions that we have in this report. Develop and maintain a shared, publicly accessible data and tools platform supported by regional data stewardship and build human capacity to ensure ongoing governance, QA/QC, and technology management while improving efficiency, transparency, and cross-agency coordination. I hope the collaborative really appreciates this recommendation. We need that because we have an implementation plan and we need to monitor and measure that. And the data that we acquire is going to be really important for us to track the outcomes and make sure that we are implementing the recommendations in that plan and they're yielding value to our watershed. So I just wanted to talk about that briefly, introduce people to this idea. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jim. And it's really great to see the advanced thinking you all are putting in on the data piece. And one of how many actions? It's no small feat.
It is 19 strategies and there's a bunch of actions that come out of that. There's about 120 or 130 actions. They're not necessarily project focused. Projects come out of those actions. We wanted this report to be evergreen, so quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. I see some people are having some issues with the Menti. I wonder if, Lisa, we can just go to sort of final results here. Looks like long-term monitoring as a popular one, multiple benefits across siloed water management and regulatory areas. And I'm assuming maybe that was oriented towards sort of accounting for those and understanding how to prioritize projects based on those multiple benefits. But if you wrote that one and I'm wrong in its interpretation, please feel free to write in the comments something else. Lots of emphasis here on community and regional engagement, which you talked about a lot. open source governance frameworks, including decision-making structures and maintenance structures. Great workforce development has come up. So a lot of you kind of thinking along the same lines of the conversation we've had with our panelists today. Really, really great to get your thoughts and gather your thoughts here. So thanks. And I see some folks are also writing in some thoughts who did struggle to put thoughts in the Menti in the chat window, and there's some really wonderful ones. So thanks to those of you who are doing that as well. And I'll make sure people are paying attention. I don't know if we'll be able to read all of them. I did want to, somebody here has asked another question for our panelists, so I'm going to prioritize that and maybe get back to some of those comments afterwards. Reporting requirements are a huge source of data, and we spoke a little bit to this already, but how can we ensure that regulatory data collectors harmonize data definitions and collection methods and strategically make self-reported data usable and impactful for management and policymaking? To some degree, we've addressed this, Greg, but I don't know if you and or Paul have additional thoughts you'd want to add in response.
There you go, Greg.
I'll go. You can back clean up because yeah, I'll do my best. We are a huge agency that drives a lot of different regulatory collection of data, and some of you on this meeting, I'm sure, are subject to those requirements. And it's very frustrating. In one of my previous jobs, I designed a database to collect data from permit enrollment processes for 9 to 11,000 construction projects every year. And then in my latest role, I look back and it's like, what a mess we're creating when we go. And that was our legacy requirements. We were subject to all sorts of things that sort of drove us to that solution. But the bottom line is it's kind of a mess. And that's just regulatory administrative data with its main purpose, I'll be blunt here, probably too blunt, was to do invoicing for fees. It had a lot of other expectations placed on the data collection, but it does sort of work for that. But, now we're sitting on these systems that drive collection. And, we have a vision at the Water Board of maybe creating a single sign-on for all the different sort of regulatory data that comes in. Maybe there's hope with some of these more automated workflows and using AI and things to sort of say, hey, that data's already been submitted, or data like that's already been submitted. We don't need your extra data on this subject, or some way to sort of like help shepherd and steward and navigate folks that are submitting data to be more smart. But right now, we're still trying to like understand the complexity of the drivers that we have at the Water Board, let alone making efficiencies and improvements. And I'll just add that I did watch the consortium's project and participate a little bit in the conversations around the efforts to streamline the collection of water use data. And we definitely ran a project about making that water use data for making conservation a way of life as sort of like open data, sort of like the tail end of the data life cycle. After we have it all, what can we do with it to sort of like share it and make it more useful to folks? And that really shed a light on a lot of people's eyes and brains in this phone call today, or this meeting today, about the complexity and the complicatedness of working with the people and the projects and the programs and the legacy drivers. So I don't think I have a lot of hope for everyone on the phone call today, but I do think that there's a lot of people trying to make it better.
Yeah, and I kind of see sort of a split again with old legacy data sets that are real difficult, and people have the view that, we that required different data sets really aren't thinking, and I think there's been examples where it's shown that, the legacy data doesn't talk to anything else, and it's problematic. But I kind of, look a little bit more optimistically as to where the current data sets that are coming in are far more integrated. And I think even in Sigma, which is a fairly new program, just thinking of annual reports that originally had been coming in, and they were just all over the place because people submitted in without a huge amount of guidance. They looked at the regs and some other things and what we required and came in, and we just got a scattershot. Now we've gone to at least looking to set up in the portal just a where people can submit their data, and that way it'll seamlessly get in for analysis and everything else. And I think even with Prop 4, as best we can. For a start, we'll be having templates for different types of projects to ensure that as it comes in on our end, once it gets in the back office, it'll be able to be integrated as much as possible with everything else, but at least in a consistent format. So again, invite everyone as we go through the summer on scoping for guidelines. Be mindful of that and really give us your thoughts on how to advance this so we don't, redo past problems that we're really shaking our heads and scratching our heads how to fix now. So.
Well, I don't want to belabor the same line of questioning, but we got an interesting kind of question that takes this into a whole different kind of line of thinking, which is around like, I think we've been talking a lot about the system that we're working within and its constraints and challenges. And Lucy Andrews here has asked a question about how we might change that system to make some of this more, easily or readily possible. And so she asks, what statutory or regulatory changes do you think are necessary to streamline this work? We've got a multiple decades long mess of conflicting, duplicating, and orthogonal requirements to comply with in the public sector, which should be jettisoned and by the legislature or related bodies to make our work more possible. So I know that's a difficult question to answer, but I wanted to kind of flag it and pose it as outside the current system.
I mean, if I understand the sentiment, I understand and don't disagree with it. I think there's been, important statutes and programs put in place for a lot of good reasons at the time. And as that goes through the process and negotiations, they get laser focused to find that middle to get done. And then once it comes out the other end, the ones who have to comply say, well, we're doing a very similar thing over here, but no one thought about that because it opens that can of worms. So I think, one, not to be jaded, but it is part of our public process for good or for ill that gets there. And so it's really incumbent upon us to take those things and try to bridge them as best we can. And we've gone through an exercise looking at urban water management plans, ag water management plans, and annual reports from GSAs to try to crosswalk. And so water use efficiency is looking at, the guidelines for that to try to bridge with GSAs also. Sorry. How to, if it is the same data set, how to guide the agencies to do that so it could be done as efficiently as possible so they're not redoing the same thing, and not to slam consultants, but they're not paying the consultants the same amount, to do the same work slightly differently. So we hear that. And that's going to be a major emphasis we're going to be looking at is program improvements now that we're a good 10 years into Sigma.
Okay, great. Thank you for taking on that question, Paul. I'm going to ask one last one that hasn't been asked yet. It's a slightly different topic, and there's a lot of context behind this question that I'm not going to read, but panelists and others can go into the chat and sort of see all the background. But the question is basically, is there going to be investment through Prop 4, or does anyone think there should be? It's another angle on it in virtual water accounting. So being able to trace water better from diversion through use to destination, and some of the sort of outcome metrics that are capable of answering questions about beneficial use and sort of the end impact of the water's movement throughout the system. So I've vastly shortened the question, so apologies to its author, but trying to get it out there quickly so we can get some quick ideas before
I was going to say this to the last question, but I think it applies quickly to start off conversation on this one too, which is I really do think some entity in California, state government, ought to be charged with being the water accountant. I think we have such a disparate set of authorities directed when it comes to the different water subsets and themes and data collection and topics and policy areas that it sort of lends itself to not having a singular voice on some of these things. And I think this is really a friend and colleague's idea, Rafa, who's a water economist who used to work with me at the state here. But Spain and a lot of these places that sort of like have very similar complexities and problems, they treat it as an agnostic position that sort of is in charge of presenting the government and the public the same data that can be used for anyone's decision-making purpose. And I think it's a beautiful vision. I don't know how we get there, but I think that really would help. And if we can do it with virtual sort of piloting to show the value, I think that's a great idea.
Again, I would bring that also to the water plan discussion because I think that's really at the heart, but it is going to be focused really looking at future projections and hitting those targets. But I think that topic too will also be a good forum discussion also.
And I'd just say from a local level, I think it's really important to have that accounting to know what the different uses of water are, like just maybe again from a more of a Sigma perspective, that if that water is being diverted and then it's used once and then it's picked up somewhere else down the line and used again, well, is the manager of the GSA going to consider that, just assume that that's groundwater use when they're looking at that consumption? No, we really need to track it and know that that's just a second use of that water that was diverted, or a third or multiple uses. And I think that's in Merced County, it's something we struggle with, and getting a handle on how many times diverted water is used over and over again and making sure that we're accounting for that properly. And it's important.
Thanks for bringing in that perspective too, Lacey. I unfortunately think we are at time in terms of the panel discussion, and gosh, you all brought so much energy to this and so much engagement, the audience members and the panelists. Thank you for sticking through a long conversation with us on, what hopefully we all believe is a really critical and important topic. And I'll put a special thanks out to Paul for sort of the clear interest you have in hearing from the broader community about what the opportunities are out there. So hope you all take him up on that offer to reach out and share thoughts and ideas. I wanted to just really quickly share some next steps kind of on where we're headed with this work and what to expect from us. So, as I just alluded to, we would love to continue to hear from all of you out there in the community about work you're doing in the data space, whether it's related to Prop 4 or not. We do really hope to collect and share out some stories that can kind of build some momentum and show what's possible. So if you think you have one of those stories, please don't hesitate to reach out. We also kind of acknowledge that there are some restrictions and bonds, that those have been mentioned as a funding source for this type of work. So we're working in partnership with state agencies right now to try and identify granting programs that have the required flexibility and scope to maybe more easily pilot some of these types of recommendations. And also kind of thinking through like what are those critical data types that we might prioritize the implementation of these recommendations around, that have like really high value within a region beyond the single project for which that data may be being collected. And so thoughts and ideas on that topic are also very welcome. We're also working to finalize a data management plan template that, were some of these recommendations going to move forward in the Prop 4 context or otherwise, that could be kind of a resource to be shared out with grantees. Finally, I just want to say, the opportunities for better incorporating, modernizing, applying, and using data infrastructure in California extend, obviously far beyond this climate bond context. We heard Meredith in her opening remarks allude to the way that AI and, other related technologies are really rapidly changing the way that data is assessed, collected, QA/QC'd, and shared. Paul has mentioned we have a brand new water plan process that's taking shape with the first advisory committee meeting happening in 5 minutes. We've got a new gubernatorial administration on the horizon in California. California is set to test a whole bunch of new ways for managing for groundwater sustainability, delta water quality, and a host of other outcomes. And so with that broader context in mind, we at the consortium want to be sure that we're talking with as many folks as possible and really setting an ambitious vision for data's role in a well-informed and adaptive water future, looking forward to the next decade now. It's been 10 years since the Open and Transparent Water Data Act was initially passed. And so we really want to kind of understand what's worked well and set a vision for what comes next. And so to that end, we are launching a vision setting process this year, and we very much welcome input along the way. We hope that you'll kind of keep your eyes peeled for updates on that front and not hesitate to reach out with your own thoughts. And as I mentioned, one goal that we have is to capture important lessons learned since the passage of AB 1755 10 years ago. So a specific ask is if you have thoughts on that, what you've observed that has been really impactful and meaningful, and alternatively, sort of where are we still kind of really struggling to make progress, and why. We very much welcome thoughts along all those fronts. So a huge thank you to all the participants for sort of playing along and providing responses to the surveys. As I mentioned, we will do our best to kind of collect all of those thoughts and make sure that those get shared out. And so they're not just only available via this little Zoom channel. And really, really appreciated the conversation. And thank you all again. And we'll give you 4 minutes back, I think, in your day. So thanks so much, everybody.